I'm the only thing that stands between you and drinks, as I understand. And so I'll start coming back on Earth from cyberspace to some simple questions on how we can help humans behave, and this will give us a different view, perhaps, on what we should ask agents and what we should expect from such agents. I'll first give you a few insights about activity and its scaffolding. Then I will present this installation unit of observation that Roy just mentioned. And I will show some of its properties, which are also interesting for us when we design agents, and briefly talk to you about how we can use this installation theory framework for design. So as you perhaps know, there's a difference between behavior and activity. Behavior is what people do, but seen from the outside. It's an external description of objective phenomena, but activity is what we do seen from our own perspective, okay? It's goal-oriented, it's subjective, and it does produce experience, right? Which is an internal outcome, while behavior, which also comes out of activity, is the external outcome, for example, producing something or creating a new state of things, okay? And of course, we are interested in activity because it both produces results in the outer world and internal experience. And a good business is a business that supports activity. And when I talk about business, it's not just about commercial organizations. This could be governments. This could be local communities. This can be any type of agent. It could be you and your family actually trying to support some kind of activity of your kin. And if we want to support better business, to create better business, we must find ways to support activity better and therefore produce better outcome and better experience. But then the question is, what exactly are we trying to support? What is the core of our business, and what does produce fluid, grateful, satisfying activity, which should be the outcome of every business? So to study this issue of what exactly produces activity, what are the good components, I've been developing with my group a technique that now seems so obvious, but at the time wasn't, which is trying to figure out what activity is by recording it from the first-person perspective. So in the first place, we capture behavior from subjects' perspective in the wild as they do their normal stuff, and we do this with miniature video cameras that they wear on their glasses or on a pair of blind glasses, and then we look at the tape with the participants and we review it together. And the fascinating thing is that this situated first-person perspective watching of your own action in the past triggers episodic memory. And we noticed that people are able to get an accurate recovery of mental states, of their goals, of their motives, of their emotions, even weeks after the fact. This especially when there has been movement, because memory is something that is multimodal, and when you give back the cues, you get back into the same mental state. Perhaps some of you have ever had that strange experience of, like, say you're coming from the kitchen into the living room and suddenly you forgot why you were there, right? Okay, now have you noticed that if you go back and go again, suddenly the intention comes back? All right. Because we are bodies, okay? And putting back the body in the same situation enables us to see, to remember and to recover. That's the subcam. I can circulate one after if you're interested. You see it's just a very small, very light, 17 grams, high quality video camera. It captures sound. You see it here on Norwegian policeman, here in Denmark, an anesthetist. And I'll give you just a quick example of the first part of the data. You understand there's two parts of the data. The first time we capture behavior from a situated perspective, and then we capture what were the insights, the experience of the participants when they watched the film. And we also videotape this. This is from a nurse preparing her medication round. That's in a Danish hospital. You just saw the computer with the prescription that she's trying to put now in these small boxes, the right amount of medication for each patient. She puts that on the tray. You notice that there are smartphones, but these are not the only devices. There's a lot of stuff around there.
Hej med jer.
Okay, that's real activity. Now think you're, for example, the government trying to improve the rate of, say, nosocomial infections in hospitals. Think you're the provider of the software that makes these prescriptions available. Think you're the patients' associations. Think you're the nurse training college, right? You have to understand exactly what is this activity about, what supports it. And as you noted, there are digital devices, but there's lots of things that are not digital devices. There are humans, there's lots of material things that support the activity. Sometimes they don't support it as well as you would like when you're trying to pull out this little tissue from the machine, how annoying that is, right? And, but these are essential to good and fluid and efficient and secure activity. Now, I'll give you a quick example of what happens when the participants look at their film from the first-person perspective. What is written here is exactly what you will hear in the film. It starts with the nurse calling for help. This is in an IR. So this doctor is trying to intubate a patient. It's not a real patient here. It's a robot, which is controlled and very realistic. But then she can't manage to intubate the patient because the throat is a bit closed. Actually, we're back there in the control room and making the situation difficult for the poor team that's trying to do this and try to push them to do a tracheotomy, which they don't like at all. What I would like you to look at is the change of expression of that anesthetist, and she's an excellent anesthetist. She sympathizes with the patient, and look at her face when she gets back in her thought and in the situation.
We're in room 2 in the ICU.
So that's the situation seen from her, right?
A 70-year-old man with COPD, and
she's at the head of the patient.
yeah, she did. She tried everything.
Can you remember what you're thinking at that point?
I'm thinking it can't be true. I can't get that. Can't get a view. I'm just thinking. Well, I'm okay. He's actually. Well, he's saturating 83, which is not good, but it's not worse than what we started out with. And then I'm thinking, well, is he too little? Is he not enough sedated? Because he has a tachycardia of 129, I think. Mm-hmm. It's actually pretty much. It might be the ephedrine, and then it might be that he's not sedated enough. This would also, but this would normally just close up the vocal cords. It wouldn't give the whole tension like he has, as I feel. I see.
So you see that this participant, hours after the fact, is able to remember the accurate parameters of the patient, which changed pretty much, right? And she gets back into her situation at that moment, and you can feel how she worries for the patient and how she empathizes with the patient. Now, so what we're doing in these replay interviews is that using activity theory at each step of the action, we reconstruct the determinants of action, and we try to collect the user experience. That is, we try to collect the components that produce activity, that push it forward, the feedback, the scaffolding, and their impact of experience, okay? And we have been doing that on quite a range of situations. You've got here examples from shopping, from creativity, from industrial maintenance, policing. In London, policemen were wearing these cameras, civil service, vocational training, nuclear plant operation, and I mean, quite a few of these things, right? And always in natural situations, and we just equip the participant, let them do their thing, and then when they're happy with the data, and they're in full control of the data, because that is how we get trust. If they're not happy with it, they just discard the data. If they're happy, they give it to us, and we will watch it together. We have found some interesting things. And this interesting thing is this idea of installations. So, as I said, we reconstruct how activity is constructed. And the main findings are as follows. The first one is, actually you've got three types of determinants of action. The first one is affordances, physical affordances. I'll come back in the detail to this. The second is embodied competences, and the third is social regulation. But a more interesting finding was that these components operate as a bundle. And I'll try to explain this. I will define an installation as a specific local setting where agents are expected to behave in a predictable way. This installation consists of a set of components that support and control individual behavior, and they assemble when and where activity is performed. For example, this installation is a conference, okay? It did not exist yesterday. There was the room, there were the people, but there was no conference, okay? So this is a very strange unit. But if you think of it, makes things very predictable. Let me take another example. Lots of people take the plane. Is this the case for some of you? Yeah, okay. Now, think last time you took the plane, from the moment you went to the check-in at the airport to the moment you collected your luggage at the other end on this, whatever you call that, roundabout, you took very, very few decisions of your own, okay? Maybe you chose the drink in the plane. Maybe you chose to go or not to the duty-free shop. You didn't choose your seat in the plane. You didn't choose where to wait. You didn't choose the time. You were channeled all along, okay? And you were channeled all along, as were all the other alienated passengers. And strangely enough, this was the case for everyone, whatever age, gender, social class, level of education, purpose, past experience, language, whatever, okay? All the classic variables that we use are sort of superseded by this device that drives us into this sort of tunnel of behaving properly as an airline passenger, okay? Now, that is how societies operate. They channel people's behavior, okay? And they channel people's behavior in most places. Most of our activity takes place in installed places, in installed setting. And why do they do this? And that's an interesting thing when you think about agents and intelligent agents. They do this because we're not so smart, you know. We are excellent at doing some things like pattern recognition, or hearing this noise, is this a tiger, is this something I could grab and eat? But as a matter of fact, I am, perhaps you're not, but if you give me 3 telephone numbers right now, I'm incapable of remembering them, right? Very, very small working memory, very poor computational power, all right? The basic component of society has been designed for something which is quite different than the current society. It's been designed for living by groups of, say, 150 hunter-gatherers. It's very well designed for this, but it's not really designed for complex, societies needing a lot of computational intelligence. We are cognitively limited, we're self-centered, we're emotional, we're territorial, we're aggressive, and we have still a Stone Age mind. And with this kind of component, we're managing to do amazing things, right? Walking on the moon, going into space, organizing large cities with millions of these, aggressive territorial primates. How do we do that? We channel them, okay? And we channel them more and more, and in most moments. Here are some examples of installations. And if you think a little bit of your day today and yesterday and try to figure out how much of your time was actually outside of installations, you will probably not find that much, okay? We're like chaining these little bits of episodes where we are predictable. We have the choice. You know, we can take the bus, or we can take the bicycle, we can take the stairs, or we can take the lift. But once we're in the stairs or the lift or the bus, we have to do as planned by the installation, okay? And this is the way we have to do to run complex societies. So I know this seems kind of a strange unit of analysis because it doesn't exist outside of the moment where it coalesces to produce the activity, okay? But even though epistemologically it makes no sense, it does make common sense to us because all these installations do make sense to you and are natural units for interaction, okay? And so from cradle to grave, we live a lot of our lives in installations. And you are members of that society, but members more specially in charge of designing such installations. So you have a huge responsibility. We have a huge responsibility. So let me describe quickly what is an installation made of with the various layers. So roughly, I said 3 types of components: physical affordances, embodied competences, and institutions, social control. Affordances, I think you are all familiar with that notion. That is what things furnish for us, what they afford us. You can sit on chairs are seatable, water is drinkable, for example, and we are able immediately to say whether this staircase is or not walkable. And that is actually a very good evaluation that we have, and it matches the biomechanical capacities of the human beings. We know that this is seatable, for example. The second layer of components is the embodied competences, and by this I mean representation and other embodied skills that we enable us to interpret objects and situations. I mean interpret not just in sort of the cognitive sense, but also like we interpret a piece of music, for example. Interpretation is also action, right? And it's... What is this? Yes, absolutely. What is this? Okay. So what happens is that all of us have thousands, you know, of possible such competencies to recognize even from a few pixels situations or objects, and we know what to do with it. This is drinkable. You know how to behave for tea or in a restaurant or for anything, even very complex. Think of how this would be difficult if you're like you're in the Stanford campus and you're in charge of having all the computers having the same operating system. It's a daunting task, right? Something has managed all of us living in different places to have the same more or less computing system. Isn't that amazing? We'll see how this happens. Okay. Third layer is institutions. I give you here a classic definition of institutions as the set of behaviors that are acceptable or recommended in a given society, right? Of course, this comes with the structures that enforce these. So when we talk about an institution, we usually think of something with a community and a building. But as a matter of fact, what matters is the rules that are behind this. And that's what we should look at when we do analysis and design. Because as we know, all activity is socially controlled, and this control will come to us in various guises. It could be written, it could be feedback from others, it could be embodied in objects also, but this layer is omnipresent in all our activities. So what we have is that when we come into a situation, we have usually these 3 layers, and what is at the midst, at the intersection of what is technically feasible, thinkable, and allowed, is what is easy and sustainable. You can do things that are not there, of course. You can do something that is feasible, thinkable, and not allowed. This is not very sustainable. You might end up in jail, for example. Okay? You can also do something that is thinkable, allowed, but not feasible. I mean, I could jump out of the window, but of course this is not sustainable either because the affordances wouldn't be correct, right? And so this is not how it appears to us. It doesn't appear as a set of constraints. It rather appears as a set of scaffolding that opens an easy tunnel, a natural tunnel of behavior where we are, okay? And these various pieces from the scaffolding or control just guide us from where we start in the installation to the final state that we reach, and which is usually our goal. So my takeaway here is installation channel behavior. They channel behavior by offering a limited choice with 3 layers of components: affordances, competences, and institutions. They assemble at the point of delivery where they operate as a behavioral attractor, a bit like a chemical reaction or a cooking recipe, right, that produces the right result. They supersede most classical variable. And if we want good interaction, good action, good activity, we should try to support properly that installation. Okay? Now I'll give you a couple of interesting properties of these installations in natural context. As you see here, the layers are redundant, but this redundancy produces resilience because one layer can compensate the other. Let's go back to the example of this nurse doing her round in this Danish hospital. So she sees the prescription on her screen, then she will go and take the right medicine into the right shelves, put the right amount, and then she goes and delivers it to the patient, okay? Now let's see a first example of repair. So this nurse takes this little bottle of medication, and she's supposed to give that to the patient, and there is a control system. She has to scan this thing, right, to make sure she's taken the right drug. It's part of the control of the installation. She does that, but instead of being green and beeping, if it's well recognized, it doesn't. But the nurse is smart, and she knows that every medication should have a barcode. So she thinks, and she knows the ones that don't. So she thinks there must be a problem. Perhaps it's not the barcode on the little plastic bottle. Maybe it's on the outer packaging. So she looks at the outer packaging. It's not on that face, not on that one, not on that one. And finally, she finds another barcode. She scans it, and that is the right barcode. What happened here is that the embodied layer repaired the faulty physical layer. Okay? That's how real installations work in the world. Let me give you another example. Not only this produces resilience, but it does produce learning. Right? There are many ways through which social regulation produces learning. I'm just going to give you 2 examples. The first one is instruction and guidance, which we actually naturally look for to when we don't know the systems well. Same nurse or another one coming into the patient's room and to deliver the medication, but again, another control system in the installation, you make sure that you have the right patient, okay? Because patients sometimes change beds. There have been changing, or a patient is dead, or he's in surgery, or whatever, and it's not the same bed. So what they do is actually every patient has its barcode bracelet, and so exactly like this, and the nurse scans it. Thank you very much. And then it's the right patient, and the nurse delivers the medication, everything's fine. But in Denmark, when you go into transport, you scan your card once when you enter and once when you go out. If you don't scan it when you go out, it continues, debiting money, right? And here the patient, who's a novice patient, even though she's not very young, when she's got her medication, she presents her bracelet again, okay? But there's no need for this because, she hasn't moved. It's obviously the same patient. So the nurse kindly takes the arm and puts it back here and says, no, madam, it's not necessary just once. What happened here? Social layer compensated deficient competence in the user, and with 2 consequences. The first one is that the procedure was respected. The patient was scanned only once. Correct procedure. The second one is that because of this operant conditioning, the patient learned, and now she will know for next time she's a good patient. So installations, because they scaffold into the proper behavior with that redundancy do produce resilience and training of users. That's, again, how real installations operate, okay? But this can be done in various styles, and we come to this personality issue. And I'll take another example, personal this time, of a vigilante effect. So, okay, at the LSE, we have some of these formal events with a dress code. And this was a black tie event with a... Anyway, and so I go there. My presence is expected as head of department, and I wear the right thing. I mean, the tuxedo, the bow tie, and everything. And I come there, and one of my colleagues greets me and say, Saadi, nice tuxedo. And so I'm very happy. And then she adds, but you should learn how to tie your bow tie yourself. Because I had one of these knotted bow ties. Okay, so she was actually teaching me, but perhaps in a way that was not as pleasant as what was shown in the example of the nurse. So let's think of that when we have agents. There's many shades of help and support. And even if this is a very important thing, I still don't know it. So the problem is that we humans do not like to be patronized and do like to be forced. And so if the agent does not act the right way, we might not get actually the right result, but rather reactance. Okay? So this brings us to the question of what kind of agent would you like in your installation? And you shouldn't think of that just as the provider, but perhaps as the user. And there's all kinds of shades, from tool to servant, colleague, guide, vigilante, compliance officer, enforcer, boss. What is it you would like, okay? And perhaps different stakeholders have different opinions on that, okay? Anyway, using installation framework for design. So far, so good, clear, okay? Only 10 more minutes and thanks. Anyway, so as you see, installations appear as scaffolding to the subject's phenomenological tunnel in a very natural way. That's what people are used to. And therefore, this is a fantastic design target to provide support for activity. And so when we want to have a good business, we want to know what kind of activity we're supporting, what is it exactly that we're trying to give as experience, and here's how we can do it. Let us look at every step of the current activity. What are the current determinants of the activity? And they can be in various layers. Usually they're in 3 layers, but one may be dominant or faulty or something. One may be more critical, okay? And just try to figure out what's wrong, what could be improved, where it rubs, where people feel uncomfortable or dissatisfied or would like something else. You see, how can we make it better, right? Satisfy better the goals, that is, help the participant reach the final desired state, right? In a fluid, graceful, satisfying interaction. And so you can redesign parts in any layer. And that's the fascinating thing, is that as you saw, you can correct something that is faulty in one layer by something in another layer. And it completely depends on what kind of agency you have. You may have the budget, and then you would do, design, all right? You move something in the affordances. You may have political power or the right window of management, and you may have influence on the rules. Or you may have some kind of access to training or education, and this is the way you would operate. And perhaps if you're even more lucky, you have access to several layers at the same time, right? And there you will be confronted with what is it exactly that you want to make better, okay? And this creates a whole lot of design issues, right? Because we can do anything with these agents, okay? There's no limit, virtually. But it's not because we can that we should, all right? And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, we are bringing in some other resources, some distributed component in the activity, and what kind of competence do we want to give that agent, right? What affordances, what degree of awareness? To whom does the agent report? On what? How is it evaluated? Like, what are the criteria that are used, for example, in the deep learning to make that agent better? Right? And I would like to stress here only two important issues. The first one is what Kinberg and Fox call the semantic Rubicon. Right? Semantic Rubicon is the demarcation between the system and the user for whom takes the decision and who has responsibility. Okay? And this is the difference between helping and patronizing or forcing. Who can take what decision? All right? This is an ethical question, right? This is not a technical question. We could do anything, but we have to decide what to do. Semantic Rubicon. Who is entitled to take what decision, right? The second one, and has been talked much about this today, is the privacy dilemma. The problem is if we want better service as a user, we have to display our preferences. We have to display information, right? And therefore, we have to discuss with the users exactly on where they would like to see that limit and how easy it's going to be for them. But the more easy it's going to be for them, the more they will have to disclose. And if they disclose something that can be used for other things than that specific activity, we start having problems. Okay? One of the guidelines that we had for the disappearing computer was that the information should be used only locally and for the activity at hand. Once again, the idea is to look at the installation. What's the activity at hand? If you focus just on this, what happens in the activity stays in the activity, to paraphrase something about Vegas, I think, in this local culture. Okay. So redesign tried to facilitate the user, but not the user, also the providers, all the participants reach their goals, address the terms of action that are unsatisfactory, and they could be in any layer, designed for resilience, and you can do this with either physical design, training of the users, or changing the rules. You can be opportunistic in the choice of layers, but my advice is to do that with the stakeholders, because in the end, we could do anything, but the right solution is what the stakeholders, will finally decide together. And I'm very close to conclusion. We made a series of experiments to try to figure out in design what would work best. So here this is an example. I won't go into the detail. 400 families, we tried to make Polish children drink more water and less sweet beverages, which produce a lot of whatever. And so you look here at the changes in the intake of plain water, and 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. The more layers, the more impact. And here, this is the substitution that we got. They drank basically less. I don't want to give any brand names, but they drank less Coca-Cola and things like that. And what you must be aware is that at some point, when you change one of the layers, the other layers will change also. This is the number of road fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles of travel. Which is very small. I mean, I calculated that statistically we could drive like 10 hours a day for 1,100 years before having a fatality. I mean, no technical device that we make reaches the level of reliability that installations do have. But if you change, for example, this type of crossroads to roundabouts where there's less possibilities of contact and accident, you will also have to change the rules and the training of users. But this might come in time, because if you force something, the other layers will sort of adapt. Okay? I'll skip that thing on meetings, and that's my final takeaway. Many behaviors are channeled by installations, because that's how complex societies work. 3 layers: affordances, competences, social regulation. Installation theory, as you see, provides a very pragmatic framework for analysis and intervention, sort of a checklist of what to look at where to intervene. In good installations, redundancy makes the installation resilient, right? And this is especially good for safety, but also for quality control. I have just hinted at the fact that societies reproduce through installation. I mean, actually, I've only taken you through chapters 1, 4, and part of 8 of my book, but the real theory is that societies do not reproduce top-down, but they reproduce in all these installations in a distributed manner. Like when you queue for the cinema, you learn how to queue for every cinema, but you also learn to queue for supermarkets, etc. And you can learn that in any cinema. This is how we manage to have this fantastic distribution. You remember that slide about everybody having the knowledge of what tea or restaurant is in their head? We have all learned it in slightly different places, but because of standardization, we manage to all share the same thing. But this doesn't happen top down, it's like distributed, right? And the evolution is also distributed. But okay, so read the book. All right. We can improve installations with any of these 3 layers: design, training, and rules, okay? And the way to do it is just follow the activity from the perspective of the users. And when I say the user, it's not the final end user, the consumer. It might be also the provider, the person who sells, the technician, because all these people are involved in good, fluid and satisfying operations. As you have seen, the more layers, the more impact you may have in changes. Changes should be done with the stakeholders, and the reason why you have to do it with the stakeholders is, as you have seen, there are very serious design trade-offs. These design trade-offs are not technical issues. I want to insist on this. They are social and psychological issues, and therefore they can be solved only through discussion. It's a political matter. It's often a matter of power struggle. We don't have to be innocent about this. But these are not technical issues, and if we don't do these things properly, the systems will not operate properly. So we have to start thinking about introducing agents. It's exactly when you're hiring people in your company, right? It's much more than a technical issue. It will change the nature of what the vibe is in that community. And so involve the users in whatever you're doing. Thank you.